there is one thing that we can be absolutely certain about in this lifetime is that we will all perish, pass on, die, whatever you want to call it. It'll happen to each and every one of us. Now, is it into darkness and absolute nothingness? Or is there something more? It's one of the life's biggest mysteries. But on December 8th of 1984, there was a tragedy in the rock and roll world that has got to teach us one thing, if not many more. That is, we should take every waking moment of this life, enjoy it, be happy, do the things that we want to do. Because it only takes a split second for it to all come crashing down. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back, music lovers, especially my rock music lovers. So the year was 1979 in Helsinki. This is a city in the country of Finland. There was a guy named Michael Monroe and his buddy Andy McCoy. They formed a band that would quickly rev up to be what we would consider the sound of the rock and metal music of the 80s. Their sound would absolutely fit in. And this band was called Hanoi Rocks. Hanoi Rocks pretty much got their start like any other band. They played the local club scene. This would be the local club scene in Finland. Now, Michael Monroe and Andy McCoy both on their set list would play originals that were written by both of the guys. They were also covering bands like Cheap Trick, The Police, and MC5s. Now, if you've ever heard Hanoi Rocks, those are three bands I can absolutely relate them to. Matter of fact, they can start playing some of their songs and almost feel like I'm about to listen to a Ramones song or even The Who. I mean, these guys had a unique sound and they definitely knew how to change it up. Definitely underrated. Hanoi Rocks' earliest recordings were recorded from 1980 through 1981. Matter of fact, their debut album was released on February 26 of 1981. This album was called Bangkok Shock, Saigon Shakes, Hanoi Rocks. Now, that was the name of the album. Now, its only real success was peaking number 14 on the charts in Finland. It was around June of 1982 when Hanoi Rocks made a permanent move into London to help grow their career. They were playing a show. After the show, Michael Monroe met a fan. Now, this fan played in a local rock band around London called The Dark, now of which he played the drums for. Now, this guy's name was Nicholas Dingley, but he preferred to go by his stage name, Razzle. So by this time, Hanoi Rocks had already released their second studio album, Oriental Beat. Now, with this growing success, it did not stop them from firing their drummer at the time, a guy named Jip Casino. The reason they fired Jip was because he had a very rapidly growing drug addiction. He was a very depressed guy, and he had suicidal thoughts that he would often talk about. Now, this firing of Jip opened the door for them to hire Razzle as their new drummer. In fact, in late 1982, they actually released another album, Self-Destruction Blues. This would be the third studio album by the band Hanoi Rocks. Hey, real quick, before we move on, can you please do me a huge favor? If you're liking the video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. Those are the two things you can do for me right now. They're absolutely free. That'll help the channel grow, that'll help me grow, and I can continue doing this, which I absolutely love. So please, do those two things for me and let's move on. So Hanoi Rocks was definitely on the rise, but the only real success they were getting was like previous albums. In their homeland of Finland was the only charts that they were actually landing on. Now in May of 1983, they released their fourth studio album, Back to Mystery City. This was the first album to entirely feature Razzle on the drums, and this album definitely garnered more success than any of their previous albums. So as 1984 rolled around, Hanoi Rocks was definitely making a name for themselves and definitely on the rise. There was another band around 1984 that had already made a name for themselves. Now this band had already released two albums, both albums going platinum, the second of which being certified platinum 4 times over. Just in the United States, it was certified more than that across the world. Now, this band that I'm talking about goes by the name Motley Crue. If you're watching this video, I don't think I have to tell you too much about Motley Crue. Now, if you're somebody watching and I do, I'll make that video another time. Now, Motley Crue ruled the 80s. They're one of those rock bands, whether you liked them or not, they made an absolute stamp on that decade, and they've still continued to do great things after that. Now, I'll tell you one thing, they were definitely a group of characters. I mean, Vince Neil, the lead vocalist, a guy in his own right that is just definitely unique. Then you got bassist, Nikki Sixx. That guy, he's got some stories, man. And if you've ever read his book, The Heroin Diaries, you know what I'm talking about. If you've never read it, go check it out. Drummer, Tommy Lee. Guy full of surprises, and well, he made a video back in the day with a lady named Pamela Anderson from Baywatch. If you've never seen it, go check it out. Definitely an Oscar nominating performance. And then you had lead guitarist Mick Mars, the elder of the band. Definitely a cool guy, calm, collected, didn't get into too much trouble, but the rest of the guys in the band, they definitely garnered a, well, hell of a reputation. So now back to Hanoi Rocks. In 1984, they were definitely on the rise. And I had never heard of the band. I had heard this story that I'm telling you right now a few times, never in full length and never a lot of the details, but I knew about it. Now, Hanoi Rocks, after going back and listening to a lot of their albums, a lot of their songs, I gotta tell you, completely underrated. And definitely don't get the credit they deserve. This band is badass, and if you've never heard them, go check them out. Absolutely amazing band. Michael Monroe, the lead singer, awesome. Now, this time in 1984, they were gearing up for their second ever American tour. This was only the second time they would make a trip to America. But this was the first time they were making a trip to the West Coast, California, to be more specific. Now, they were gearing up for 2 sold-out shows in Los Angeles. Now, Los Angeles was Motley Crue's town. Now, any of those other bands that came out of the 80s, you know, Sunset Strip movement, you know, the hair metal, the glam metal, I mean, the guys that came out of LA, that's their town. But Motley Crue made it very, very clear that they owned Los Angeles. So on December 8th of 1984, members from Hanoi Rocks, Razzle, and the rest of the guys, excluding Michael Monroe, who was resting up because he had an ankle injury, they all went to the Redondo Beach, California home of Vince Neil. And they were there to do one thing, and that was get their party on. And that's exactly what they did. So after hours of partying and no more beer, Vince Neil and Razzle decided to load up in Vince's Pantera sports car and make a beer run at a local liquor store. Now they drove off, and it wasn't long after this that Vince, driving at very high speed, spun out of control, crashed into an oncoming car. That impact led them to hit a third car. Now, the 2 passengers that were in the car that was initially impacted dealt with very, very serious injuries. The individual in the third car was very lucky to walk away with minor injuries, if any at all. But the real story was the Pantera sports car that Vince and Razzle were sitting in. So as first responders and law enforcement finally showed up on the scene, the biggest thing was, first, when they checked Vince Neil's blood alcohol level, it was a 0.17, well over the legal limit in the state of California. And not only that, he was driving at very high reckless speeds. Now, as far as Razzle, he was pronounced dead at the scene. He died instantly upon impact, at least that's what they say. Now, Vince was arrested, and he got charged with vehicular manslaughter, and he was given a sentence of 30 days in jail, 5 years probation. He served 19 of those 30 days. Now, that's huge, and you want to start asking questions of how the hell did that happen, because I have somebody in my family, extended family, that was arrested for vehicular manslaughter. They sat in jail for 15 years. Now, can you tell me why one happened one way and one the other? Don't know. Could have been the state, could have been the circumstance, could have been the lawyers that were able to be hired. I don't know. But 19 days in jail, 5 years probation. You know, I've seen a ton of VH1 specials, MTV specials, all kinds of different interviews growing up with Vince Neil talking about what happened with Razzle that night. Now, you got to realize, so moving forward after that, Motley Crue went on to amazing heights. I mean, you know what Motley Crue is today. Matter of fact, their first album after that incident, Theater of Pain, one of their best albums probably to date, was dedicated to Nicholas Dingley, or Razzle. But as it goes for Hanoi Rocks, they rolled into 1985, and they did some touring overseas. They brought in Terry Chimes, the former Clash drummer, to fill in for Razzle. But it wasn't long after that that they split, and that was it for them. And they did get back together 16 years later in 2001, did some stuff for about 7 or 8 years, and then broke it off again, up until recently where they've actually gotten back together and done some stuff. But, you know, knowing what Motley Crue went on to do, you just can't help but look at Hanoi Rocks, what happened, and just help but wonder what could have been. Like I said earlier in the video, if you've never heard Hanoi Rocks at all, or just maybe heard them a few times, you got to go check them out. These guys are absolutely amazing. I cannot stress enough that these guys, I think they would have been something special had they been able to continue on what they were already building in the mid-80s. But unfortunately, tragedy struck, and that's life. And like I said before in the video as well, you just don't know. You know, I think about how many times as a teenager in my early adult life, that going partying, being reckless, and putting myself or others in those positions where things could have went really bad. I mean, even thinking about being late to work and hauling ass. You know, there's been times I've whipped from one lane to the other and realized, you know, that was close. Had I not gotten lucky, it could have been bad. You know, me hitting somebody or them hitting me. And we all have those on a daily basis where we're probably escaping fate just by a hair. But that's just it. It's not meant to be. That's not our fate. When it is meant to be, however it's meant to be, it will happen. And for Razzle that night, it was meant to be. And it wasn't meant to be for Vince. And it's just the way life goes. We don't know when or how it's going to happen, but it will. And I think Hanoi Rocks, they left a legacy, and they can always hang their hat on that. It just was meant to be that way. But definitely they know how to play rock and roll music. That was one hell of a band, and you got to check them out. But anyway, that's the story of Razzle, and you know, Vince Neil's had to live with that his whole life. You always wonder with people that escape a tragedy when other ones lose their life. You know, they're lucky, they got to live their life, but you really never know what's going on in their head. How has that affected Vince? He's also lost a child, so you know, Vince has been through the ringer as he's got to live his life. Obviously, Razzle never got that chance, but in the end, that's how it's got to be. But you know what? I really appreciate you guys coming and watching. I love researching and doing this video, and I love telling these stories. You know, that's just an amazing story, a tragic story, but in the end, it's something that affected rock and roll music for that moment it happened moving forward. But again, thank you guys for watching. Until next time, go take care of yourself. Have a Merry Christmas. I'm out.